Hey, it's Marcel. Before we get this episode rolling, I wanted to let you know that the next From Boss to Leader workshop is happening on January 28th, 11 a.m. Eastern Time here in the US. This is a half-day workshop intended for listeners of Love in Action in management roles. I'm going to personally walk you through specific steps to help you lead with confidence, motivate people, and bring out the best in your team members for getting results. This is a great workshop for people who want to learn the practices of servant leadership. So if that's you and you're interested, go to my website right now and click on training and find From Boss to Leader workshop. Or just go to the show notes of this episode and you'll find a link to From Boss to Leader workshop.
Welcome to the Love in Action Podcast, the show that explores all the ways you can evolve into the best version of yourself as a leader. I'm your host, executive coach, speaker, and author, Marcel Schwantes. I believe that when we show up with our full humanity to work and lead from a place of love and care and inclusion, it will make a radical difference in your leadership, your business, and your bottom line. This is a show about love as a leadership and business strategy. Let's do this.
Hey guys, welcome back to the show. Glad you are here. Thanks so much for joining us today. Now, if you follow my writings and thought leadership, I cite a lot of research, right, to inform my own work and really to help point people in the right direction, whether they're clients or my readers, my followers, etc. So one of those wells that I draw from, if you will, is the great global management consulting company, McKinsey and Company. And, McKinsey, the biggest companies in the world turn to McKinsey and Company for learning and transformation, right? And so with that said, 4 of McKinsey's senior partners decided to write a book and give its global readers a first ever sort of a look behind the curtain, if you will, at McKinsey's step-by-step approach to transforming leaders both professionally and personally. And that book is called The Journey of Leadership: How CEOs Learn to Lead from the Inside Out. It was released back in September. And in this book, the authors share how leaders hone the psychological, the emotional, and ultimately the human attributes that result in success in, today's most demanding top job, the CEO of the organization. So we were lucky enough to nab one of those senior partners to talk with us today. Hans-Werner Kaas will join us shortly. Hans-Werner is the co-dean of the CEO leadership program, the Bauer Forum, a former member of its global client council, and a senior partner, emeritus, at McKinsey. Hans-Werner works and counsels CEOs and leaders across multiple industry sectors globally. And Hans-Werner Kaas finally joins us. And he's here right now. Hans-Werner, welcome to the Love in Action podcast.
Thank you, Marcel, and big thanks for hosting me, representing my dear friends and co-author colleagues here, but also more broadly what we have learned within McKinsey, having worked with CEOs over many years in our CEO program, which you already referenced, the Bauer Forum. We'll have a chance to also talk a little bit about it.
Absolutely. Can't wait to dive in. So we start the episode this way. You ready?
Yes.
What's your story?
So, not that always that easy to frame a story within maybe a minute, but let me give it a shot, Marcel. I would summarize my story as a story of unplanned detours. And let me explain why. That's really the nutshell summary. I graduated from high school in a small city right outside of Frankfurt, west of Frankfurt. And my passion at that time was indeed to pursue a military officer career I applied with the German military at the time to become an officer and passed that first test. That was always an admission test. And I wanted to become a fighter pilot. And in the last screening stage, before even the training started, I was indeed put into a flight simulator. And in a 2-hour exercise, multiple things to do, multitasking, et cetera, I made in the last couple of minutes a flight mistake. I will not go into the details in terms of ascending versus descending, changing course, all that. Long story made short, I was actually screened out in that very last selection stage. And obviously, I was a bit heartbroken. I think that's fair to say, a little bit heartbroken. And I was offered then to pursue a different military officer path within the Air Force, German Air Force. But I found that boring. Also turned down the opportunity to study at the German Military University and needed to redirect my course. So then I found my passion for the intersection of technology and business and studied in a simultaneous degree mechanical engineering and business, and after 5 years, concluded with a master's degree. And during my different type of internships, I got to know McKinsey, obviously, in 1989. But I also worked in South Africa in an internship in a chemical company, and also for actually a longer period of time at Mercedes-Benz. I think this is where I found my passion for automotive. And I did serve throughout my 33 years quite a few automotive players. But the one thing which I noticed even in my early years working with clients and serving clients, that finding the right intellectual answer for business questions, strategy questions, organization questions, operations questions is one part of this story, or you can call it one side of the same coin. The other side of the coin are leadership questions, and how you lead yourself and how you excite your team, lead your team and lead the broader organization. And I noticed over a few years that there are indeed very insightful, very, I call it also thoughtful, emotionally, and really human leaders at the end of the day who can inspire their organizations much more than others who are, excuse my French now, I may say, a little bit technocratic in the way they lead. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with management frameworks. I have applied them. I have used them with clients over many years at McKinsey, setting targets, looking how to break them down, get the organization behind it, define initiatives, make strategic choices, and analyze strategic options. All the good stuff what leaders and business leaders need to do. But the difference maker is great leadership. And in our book, by the way, thank you for great summary. I could not have done it better, I have to admit. And the difference maker in leadership is human-centric leadership. You have to show up first and foremost as a human being. So this is my story, how from my early starts with the firm in pre-McKinsey, I was really drawn to leadership questions. And that also brought me to the Bauer Forum, being the co-dean with my friend and dear friend and co-author Ramesh. And we have been leading that over many years together. And I'm still now, even being an emeritus senior partner, run quite a few every year and enjoy doing it, because this is how we work with leaders to actually reveal their toughest issues and help them in their inner journey.
Yeah. And speaking of Bauer Forum, I was telling you offline, I thought that would be interesting to kind of insert into the conversation, because so many top CEOs globally, I mean, quite a few of them I recognize by reading the book, have gone through the Bauer Forum. So explain a little bit about it.
So the Bauer Forum is our McKinsey flagship program to really help develop and counsel coach CEOs. Mm-hmm. We have run so far, and we started end of 2011, early 2012 with the program. We have conducted approximately 155 programs. And the average size of the program, or the number of participants, is by intention small. It's only 3 to 5 CEOs.
Right.
It's not 15 or 20. And there's no textbook teaching. So this is not the program you go to when you want to get the next level of insights in strategic management, organizational design. At times, those questions can come up indeed. But what is unique about it is the private setting over 2 days. We start out on a Thursday evening where the 3 to 5 CEOs, and they are accompanied by a McKinsey senior partner or partner, really come to us with the 2 or 3 most pressing, most significant questions on their mind. And leading up to the program, we ask each CEO and their accompanying McKinsey partner to prepare for the program by reflecting on their context, their own leadership journey so far, what challenges they were facing, why did they overcome them and how, but more importantly, the path ahead. And what are the 2 or 3 most important questions? Then we go in a methodology with deep dives for each CEO. There's a significant amount of peer coaching in there between CEOs, but also we as faculty. And I'm flanked always, or Ramesh, if you wish, by 2 former CEOs. So we have a 3-person faculty team. And we then go through a methodology-based approach until Saturday, midday, early afternoon, and really dissect and develop insights working with that CEO on the 2 or 3 most important questions he or she has. Now, we were obviously interested, or you might ask, so what are the topics they're bringing to you? What are those 2 or 3 big questions on their mind? And we actually did recently some analytical work and looked especially at the CEOs over the last 6 years, but it's also true for the last 12 years. The most important question they come to us with are personal questions. Personal operating model, personal and professional leadership model, the balance between personal operating model, personal professional leadership models, how they actually get deeper to know themselves much more deeply in terms of their challenges, their human qualities, linked to human-centric leadership, of course, how they can address those, how they can translate human qualities in leading their executive team and leading their broader organization. Doesn't matter, by the way, whether it's a business organization, that can be a philanthropic organization, like we have a few CEOs in the book actually featured who are from a philanthropic background, or whether it's a government organization, can be an academic organization. So our insights and our, I call it lessons, what we have been summarizing in the book, are broadly applicable for leaders of all different backgrounds, not just for CEOs in the business world. So the outcome of that almost two-day event is a so-called commitment plan. That's really the outcome if you join and participate in the Power Forum. And that commitment plan, with the inputs and deep dives, revealing your own story, getting feedback from others, the peer CEOs, from us as faculty team, you formulate that commitment plan Saturday morning. And the commitment plan is broken down, simply speaking, in 3 buckets. What you need to do to lead yourself, to make progress in your own inner journey and reinvention around get to know your own emotions. How well are you self-reflecting? How self-aware you are? How do you actually emphasize your human attributes in daily behavior even more? Second bucket, lead the team, lead the executive team, the people more or less working with you constantly, immediately, anytime. And the third bucket is indeed lead the broader organization. And the commitment plan, we have framed it as a commitment plan because we say it's more than an action plan. You make that commitment to yourself. That is a commitment to yourself. And like when you make a commitment to a friend, to your spouse, to your children, you do not want to break that commitment to yourself or to others. You want to live through it and really deliver on that commitment. And usually the commitment plan, Marcel, is 1 page only. There are also versions of half a page, 2/3 of a page, but usually it is only 1 page. And we encourage people to take that as a navigation tool, like a compass, with them as they continue their journey. And there are different follow-up mechanisms with the accompanying partners. We, as faculty, are available for follow-up conversations. Some of those participants choose a friend or their spouse to be an additional thought partner to deliver on the commitment plan. So that's in a nutshell the Power Forum. And by the way, more than 550 CEOs have participated over the years in those 155 plus programs.
So the way that I summarize that is that the leaders that come to the Bauer Forum are really they're trying to bridge the gap between what we know what we know CEOs do well. You mentioned it, the strategy side, the operations side, right? With the part that I know personally, because I coach leaders, and this is what I see as well. bridge the gap between that side and the human-centric side, which is all in the realm of emotions and behaviors, right? And elevate that. And I guess the beginning of the journey, or it's in your subtitle of the book, it's the inside out journey that I think is the most important one, because it starts with you first. Starts with, who are you, and what's your understanding of your own emotions and self-awareness, right? And the emotions are how do you perceive other people, right? So much of what I'm hearing you say that makes up that forum is what leaders struggle with, especially the higher they go up the ranks. It seems like they lose touch with the emotional side of the business. That's what I had seen.
I think that's a very fair observation. And the description, what you use, the higher up they go, call it climbing up the organizational ladder, the career ladder, whatever you want to call it. It's not only that they lose touch with the organization, let's say third, fourth, fifth level, with folks on the factory floor, in the marketing department, in the engineering labs, whatever. Obviously, there is some natural tendency to do so because you spend more time in formalized meeting structures with senior people right around you, with your board, whether it's private company, public company, with other external stakeholders. But avoiding losing touch is so important. And one of the book contributors and also a Bauer Forum coach, Bob Chapman, who himself authored a great book a few years ago. I think he will actually publish a new edition next year about Everybody Matters. He is a great role model how to stay in touch with people and understand and get to know their stories. The second reason why it is indeed so important to actually get to know you better any day, and that's why we also obviously run the Bauer Forum to give a structured approach to those things. It is hard to get feedback when you become a senior leader or a CEO. One of the common statements when folks join us in the Bauer Forum, they say, here I have now a very private setting, frankly, following the Chatham House rules, a private and confidential setting to actually share my inner struggles, my inner concerns, and where I want to actually improve as a leader and as a human being, because it is lonely at the top. We hear that all the time, Marcel. It's just very lonely off the top because people have some natural distance. You are the leader. You are the CEO. Can they really, quote unquote, disagree with you? And of course they should. If you create a culture and atmosphere where they are encouraged to do that, you will grow. You will develop much better, deeper bonds with your people. And you will yourself become a role model again in doing so. So this is why that emotional journey and psychological understanding of yourself is so important.
Yeah, that's great. Well, let's dive into some of the chapters of the book. So much good stuff there with all of the stories that you document from people that went through the programs at McKinsey. So the perception really still to this day is that the CEO is supposed to have all the answers, right? Yeah. But personally, pardon my French here, but I think that that's a load of crap, okay? So your first chapter addresses that. It's you're not the smartest person in the room. So what's the lesson here?
Yeah, so the lesson is the following. The top line lesson, and we even, before we dive into chapter 1, we even talk about it in the introduction, call it chapter or the preface of the book. The time and age of the so-called imperial CEO is over. By the way, Marcel, it does not mean they are no longer imperial CEOs. There are still a few imperial CEOs in the world in different industry sectors, but the complexity with business we are dealing with, and it doesn't really matter which industry sector you are involved in or you are a leader within, the complexity of technological change, rate of innovation, different business models, new entrants, competitors, supply chains partially getting fragmented, getting disrupted, getting redesigned, also because of geopolitical forces at play. Then obviously we have a much more demanding younger generation to see and look and seek purpose and meaning when they join an organization. And they want to see how that is reflected in the objectives and the vision and mission of a company, but also the daily behavior and the role modeling of leaders. All that makes the questions and then thereby also the answers much more complex, that a single individual, the so-called all-knowing, omnipotent CEO, is the story of the past. And I give you a couple of maybe reference points there. There are a couple of good stories in there, actually very good ones. So the former Ford CEO, Mark Fields, was also a Bauer Forum coach. He had an assignment at a very young career stage. I think it was in the year 2000. He went to Japan to become the CEO of Mazda Corporation, which was at that part of the Ford global enterprise. And Ford had a major equity stake in there. And when he joined the Mazda team and they had one of their first executives meetings, and he indeed was not necessarily welcomed with open arms. In fact, you can call it was a very courtesy-oriented hostility, as it is probably the case in Japan, because it's a very courtesy-oriented culture, and as you know. But in a few sidebar conversations, some senior members of the Japanese team revealed to him and said, "Mark, I could be your father. I do not understand why you're qualified to lead us here. What you bring that you can help us to find a turnaround and improvement plan." So even though Mark had a lot of hypotheses and thoughts what should be done from a product strategy standpoint, we call it product market strategy, etc. So he could have acted as if he is the smartest in the room, but he knew that would destroy and not even allow him to build any trust and bonds with the senior executive team. So he held himself back and went on a many-month lasting listening tour. Nemawashi is the Japanese term where you immerse yourself in the thoughts, reflections, ideas of others, and you invest a lot of time before you actually go to the hardcore intellectual work to define the turnaround plan with all its different elements, obviously. So that is one story of indeed, you are not the smartest in the room. The other one in the book, and that is also a great example because it's the current CEO of Nissan Motor Company, Makoto Ushida-san. Interesting, he was a participant in the Bauer Forum. That was roughly 2 years ago in a Bauer Forum we hosted in New York. And he was the CEO following Carlos Ghosn. In fact, there was one CEO in between. He was not immediately following Carlos Ghosn. And you can certainly say that Carlos Ghosn was a superbly well-known, omnipotent CEO. At least I think that was certainly how he was also conveyed and portrayed. And he was certainly a capable leader. But he did not engage the organization in a way that you could say, I'm not the smartest in the room. And Mr. Ushida's son, needed to redesign and rebuild a culture where every voice is heard to actually develop best thoughts and best approaches and approaches behind it. And that takes time. So he talks quite a bit about around rebuilding culture, rebuilding empowerment, rebuilding quote unquote entrepreneurship, which is obviously the basis. And by the way, the auto companies are all in a very tough transition to a new world of sustainability, electrification, with a lot of bumps, if I may use that analogy, bumps in the road to the destination point. But it's just another example of a leader who has been and is practicing that he is not the smartest in the room.
Yeah, that's good. And this is a really good segue to the next thing I want to bring up, Hans-Werner.
Yeah.
So, if you're going to take the journey of leadership, you're going to eventually have to face the reality that vulnerability is a strength that you need to develop. It's going to catch up to you at some point, right? So being vulnerable is a scary prospect for a lot of leaders, especially, and I mentioned this earlier, the higher you climb up the ranks, it seems like the less feedback you are getting from people. And I see this as well in my work with leaders, is they have a tendency to be less vulnerable the higher they climb up. I'm wondering if that's true for you as well. So how do we ease the minds of CEOs and senior leaders to actually see vulnerability as a strength and not a weakness.
Yeah. So vulnerability, and I know you actually picked it up in a brief article you published, I think, in or around September 10th, right on the day when our book was released. Vulnerability, first of all, number one, it's a human quality. We are all vulnerable, and we learn that even in our childhood days, when certain things do not go the way they should be with our friends, with members on a sports team, etc. When you broaden your initial social context, when you leave high school, you go to university, you suddenly see and know you don't have all the answers. And there are spots in your profile, if you wish, who are really very vulnerable. That can be knowledge gaps, that can be emotional maturing or gaps or weaknesses, etc. So first of all, understanding, admitting it is a human quality and it will always be with us. Number two, and that is the most profound thing, vulnerability is one of the best ways to build bonds with people, whether it's in your family, whether it's in your circle of friends, or in your professional team and organization, because vulnerability teaches them that you are approachable and that you need others to help you develop answers and even get feedback, to actually embrace the feedback and make you a better human being first, before we even talk about becoming a better leader. But yes, you will also become a better leader. So vulnerability is a way to inviting feedback. And if you show vulnerability, people will help you. In my own experience and working with CEOs, the Bauer Forum, 95+%, you will invite unsolicited, genuine, authentic feedback and good advice from people. Business people, executive peers and colleagues, but also from friends and family. If you try to protect yourself and build a shell around you, you may call it a facade. People will not come to you. You're not authentic because you're kind of, building like a small ball around you. And they would say, hey, why should I actually even offer him some suggestions or her some suggestions? Why should I do that? So vulnerability is a way to invite feedback, build bonds. And by the way, because all the folks who give you feedback and advice, they notice themselves that they are vulnerable and are then more honest and more willing to admit it and show vulnerability. So it's a way to also inspire an organization. This is what we explain in the book. And in, frankly, many of the conversations we have, having released or published the book now, and get away from that notion of weakness. By the way, not an easy journey, because still organizations tick a little bit. We need strong leaders, a little bit following the principle of Darwinism. Those are the ones who actually survive. Those are the ones we promote. But eventually, they lose the bonds with the organization.
And yet that's why vulnerability is such a hard thing to do, because it demands courage, bravery. And because if you're going to open yourself up to receive feedback, you're going to have to accept the feedback, what's coming your way, right? And even a step further is to do something with the feedback that you receive.
Absolutely. The feedback you receive, by the way, at McKinsey, but all organizations, we are a feedback-driven culture. And in all honesty, Marcel, sometimes I felt, or colleagues felt, or one might feel, it can be overwhelming how much feedback you get. You say, how do I sort through all the feedback I get? But one way to always, is what in my view is very important, is if you boil it down and if you look over a longer time frame, you would say, hey, I heard that feedback now from 8 people over the last, call it 12 months. Then you are able to extract the most valuable pieces of feedback. These are the ones you should reflect on. And it's very important you reflect on, because you as a leader, as a human being, you still have a choice to make. Do I accept and embrace the feedback and try to change? Mostly behavioral change. Can be skill building, but mostly behavioral. That is a choice you have to make. Nobody can make that choice other than you as a person, as a human being. This is why that process, and it's all part also what we do in that inner journey and inside out, call it a little bit of a reinvention, is so important.
Hans-Werner, how much does hubris or a larger than life ego get in the way of that process of building vulnerability and leading the way, showing the example for others to also display vulnerability?
Yeah. So if you have a super ego, or even a smaller version of a super ego, it's a very tough starting point, because for whatever reason, in how you were brought up, how you lived your life, whether professionally or in your friends of circle, socially, you were always rewarded that being strong and not vulnerable is the way to go. And therefore, your reward mechanism did reward that. And you said, hey, being strong, not vulnerable, this brought me here. So it is working. Maybe I go from where I'm today, I can go even further if I remain that quote unquote, that less or non-verbal, call it setup. But the more you go in an organization, the more people you lead, the more you become a role model. And you're also visible as a role model, even to people who you do not interact with in a daily manner, even inside, outside your organization. Those people at some point may say you function almost like a programmed robot. And you don't want that. You want to interact with people. Even the time in the age of AI, predictive AI, generative AI, and we have quite a few comments in the book there as well. The human element of human touch will never be replaced. And therefore, how to overcome your super ego, it will take some real hard work of coaching and counseling with a couple of people who are closest to that person to give constant feedback. That is one way how you can address that, to adopt, embrace any way, because that vulnerability is even in the most super ego person. It's inside him or herself, just not being honest about revealing it. The other thing how to overcome it is a bit more, can be a few, I would say, life or job changing intervention points where somebody throws a wrench at you and you are not able to catch it. And that can be customer feedback, it can be a missed promotion, etc., etc. You might get, worst case, you might get fired at some point. Then people start to reflect. So either you have a very well-intended couple of advisors and coaches around you to help you overcome that ego, or it needs a little bit of a, call it a life-changing intervention.
Yeah. Is there a good example of a leader, a CEO who's kind of demonstrated vulnerability as a strength that you can think of?
We had actually a couple of them, not only a couple, a few actually in the book. Mm-hmm. By the way, not all the stories even I share with you are actually all documented in the book, but that's why we talk. One of the reasons why we talk. I give you another example of Mark Fields. Mark Fields, is not only a Bauer Forum coach with me and a book contributor, he's a former client, and I can say that now. And when he left Ford Motor Company after almost 3 years in the CEO role, that was back in May 2017, that was not the plan he had in mind. He had a major misalignment with the board. They actually decided to replace him, etc., etc. It was a very, very tough situation for him. And by the way, Mark never had a super ego as a shell around him. That was not the point. But that was a life-changing event for him, at least from a professional standpoint. And he needed to reinvent himself, actually understand what are his real passions, but also what are his emotions, what are the things he is struggling with, the quote-unquote also disappointment he went through. And he's a great example how he has reinvented himself. He is now both a private investor, he's a senior advisor at a very large U.S. private equity firm, etc. And he's member on the board of a few public companies. So that was a life-changing intervention where in the first few months, probably the pathway was not clear. Also because you need to deal with those emotions and all the things which you held up so high over all the 30 years you grew up in the industry in that particular company at Ford, etc., and then reinventing yourself. So that was life-changing. So
Yeah. So let's talk about failure, because it's going to happen. I mean, leaders fail all the time, but some leaders have a hard time dealing with it. They don't want to talk about it. They, because they're experiencing an array of emotions, guilt, shame, anger, and a lot of the leaders that I have actually coached a few of these where they bury their emotions, which then makes it worse because now they're walking around like a ticking time bomb. Some become bitter, or they may withdraw and go into deep depression. All of this stuff affects their performance. So what's McKinsey's approach to helping, coach leaders through failure and setbacks when it happens?
yeah. So the obvious answer is you have to learn from your failures, but that is only the second or third step. So when we work with leaders about failures, and all of us have made mistakes, they go through experiences of failures, we say it is a little bit of call it a couple of 2 or 3 phases you have to actually go through. Number one, admit to yourself that you have made a mistake.
There's your vulnerability part right there again.
Vulnerability. This is, by the way, where it really starts, because we are all very good in telling ourselves that, well, it's not really my mistakes, it's not my failure. Information provided to me by my team was not accurate or not sufficiently accurate. I did not have the right amount of discussions, or I did not have a good thought partner. We build I always call it our self-justification. And that is the first step, to abandon that and admit that you have made a mistake. Admit it to yourself first. Then comes the second step, be honest about it, to admit it and discuss it with others. And usually, by the way, Marcel, how that starts is you start with the people you trust most.
Right.
It's hard to do when let's say, take the example of a CEO. You usually will not talk about it immediately with your board. Who keep in mind, boards hire and fire CEOs. So that is, by the way, one of the book contributors, John Plant, who's still an active CEO, Howmet Aerospace. He was previously CEO of Arconic, a company which he split into different parts. One of them became Howmet Aerospace and still an active CEO. And before that, many years of a large automotive component supplier, TRW. He always reminds me of that and says, Hans-Werner, he's also a Power Forum coach, by the way, John Plant. He always says, keep in mind, boards hire and fire you. So if you want to find people you really trust, look at other potential confidants around you, in your team, in your social circles, whatever. So you need to find those people to whom you show most trust and admit the mistakes. Because what they can do, Marcel, is actually quite good. They give you feedback, how you admit, because you can sugarcoat it a little bit and say, yeah, that investment division of 250 million we put in that new product. Yeah, I mean, I made a mistake. I didn't listen, but you know what? Back to what I commented, being honest to yourself. The information really provided was not that proper, not that high quality. So when you get feedback from the people you trust, when you admit the mistake, they call out what you should say and what you should not say, and be really honest about it. Otherwise, when you go to the broader public within an organization, they immediately say, that guy or that lady, they're just not honest. Now they're sugarcoating. It's a little bit like paying lip service. They want to admit their mistake, but it's not really their mistake. So trust with trusted people and practice with them when you actually made a mistake. Then you go in step 3 to the broader organization. And now the important part starts. And it's a little bit like that 4-step approach. You have to ask yourself, why did you make that mistake? So that is what we obviously always say, learn from your failures. But that is the hardest part, in addition to the emotional part. So what were the assumptions you made or beliefs you have had, which led you to take a certain decision or show a certain behavior and make that mistake? So questioning those long-held and deeply held beliefs and assumptions, that is the hard part. And you have to actually challenge those beliefs and assumptions. Otherwise, you are immune to change. Bob Keegan, an emeritus professor at Harvard University, actually, he led there the graduate school for adult learning many years. He has even written a book about it, Immunity to Change. And as a side note, he was once in my early years as a senior partner at McKinsey, a coach of mine. So I recall always his point around immunity to change. And what makes us immune to change or not willing to change are those deeply held beliefs and assumptions in us. And they can be like a justification mechanism to whatever we do. We always come back to those beliefs. So you have to actually challenge that. And you do need a couple of maybe one good coach who works through that with you. It's not just say, hey, I write down those longly held beliefs, but then you need to ask yourself, why do I actually hold them up? Why? So that's our story of dealing with failure. It's a little bit a kind of a 4-step approach.
Yeah, Hans-Werner, I don't know if you're aware of the Arbiter Institute's classic book, Self-Deception or Leadership and Self-Deception. It's screaming at me right now as you explain how what may hold us back is actually these long-held beliefs and assumptions that we make, and we keep making it over and over again with the same result.
100%.
Right, and on the book, and I had Mitch Warner on the show not too long ago, and he's talking about it's not that you're doing something of a nefarious or evil nature to cause disruption or something bad to happen, but it's these beliefs that you hold on to that are actually deceiving you to making bad choices, but you don't see it. It's a complete blind spot because you don't have the awareness of it.
100% agree. And let me only add to that, to what you just shared about leadership and self-deception. It happens in all type of institutions. And one important insight brought to us in the book, but also we practiced it in the Power Forum several times, is through retired Navy Admiral Eric Olson. And only quick story. So Eric Olson himself is an educated Navy SEAL, and he rose through the ranks of a military leader within the Navy. And he became the head of U.S. Special Operations Command in 2007. And he held that position 4 years before he retired. And he has coined that term, what he calls fearless learning. And it's essential to teach all people in an organization, you can say, but certainly special warfare operators who are parts of special operations forces, who by definition take on the toughest missions and also dangerous missions. And what he has taught his people over many years in different capacities and different roles, and he brought that to the Power Forum and to the book, is that notion of fearless learning. And on the one hand, I found it very intuitive when he used that term fearless the first time and said, of course, we should not have fear. And however, the way he explained it was a little bit differently framed as I originally understood it. I thought fearless learning is looking at new facts, being open-minded to new facts. By the way, that does still matter. That's important. Not go into with preconceived notions. However, he meant something else, which is very important. That is the fear to abandon your long-held beliefs and assumptions. This is so important. And that can be long-held beliefs and assumptions, how you operate as a leader, but it can even be on a special mission. So when special operations forces, and he describes in the book, among other things, the Osama bin Laden raid, for which he was the responsible military planner, and he worked side by side with Leon Panetta, who was the CIA director at the time, and Leon Panetta had the overall responsibility to President Obama to actually plan and execute that lead. And what he says is, whenever you send special forces into a certain mission, the plan does never survive first enemy contact, the plan with which you showed up. And even though all those special operations forces, they have a plan B, a plan C, call it backup plans, and they build different scenarios. But he says even those backup plans are thrown out of the window when the reality on the ground meets our best warriors. And his notion is, when you recognize as a leader or any member of that special operational forces team, when you recognize that the terrain where you're operating in right now is different from the map, which is the analogy, obviously, of the plan, you have to go with the terrain. If the map differs from the terrain, go with the terrain, which means assess the situation real time, get inputs from every team member on that special assignment, make a new plan, which hopefully is a winning plan. So in that instance, obviously, it's giving up the specific assumptions made for that plan, for that map. But this term and the way he framed it is sticking with me, Marcel. I always think, even in small things we all do, and say, God, the terrain seems to be different, like the map. Your spouse has asked you something differently, and or she asked you to do this, and suddenly you don't get, quote unquote, you don't make progress. What's going wrong? So even in small things in life, you can apply that principle of, if the map differs from the terrain, go with the terrain.
React in the moment, right?
React in the moment. Yeah. Assess, reassess. Reassess is actually the right word. Not only assess, reassess.
Yeah. Okay, so part of the journey, and maybe it's some of these chapters almost kind of overlap and one overlaps to the other. But I wanted to talk about how leadership is to practice making mistakes.
Sure.
That can be off-putting, Hans-Werner, because none of us that are in high-level positions ever want to make mistakes. So how do we reconcile that with, doing it, practicing making mistakes, but doing it in a way that serves us well and serves our organizations well? Is there a strategy?
Yeah, there is a kind of a strategy. I would call it maybe heuristic learning, which means heuristic approaches in mathematics are always applied if you cannot squeeze a problem in a formulaic equation, whether it's a differential equation, whatever. You come up with heuristic approaches, which are the best devised approaches to deal with an issue, and that is relevant for making mistakes. So why it is so important to make mistakes, by the way, that is one also of Eric Olson's experiences he shares with us, is around practice making mistakes. Yes, and it sounds like, hey, you cannot always practice making mistakes and make mistakes 5 times, 10 times. Yes, you should not repeat the same mistakes over and over and over again, because then you have not learned and not revisited your assumptions and long-held beliefs or learnings. But the reason why making mistakes is something to practice is because when you make a mistake, you go to a very different emotional experience than being initially and always successful. And that emotional experience goes from disappointment, but eventually you develop resilience. You don't want to give up. You want to redirect course. You want to develop a new approach to actually succeed. So there's an emotional experience in practicing mistakes. And the second one is because you are forced to come back with a different approach. Because if you try to solve the same problem and it is not working and you use it over and over again, it's a definition of insanity. Yeah. So you need to apply a different approach. And that forces you to work together with others and come up with a new angle, a different plan to approach it. So when you practice making mistakes, you usually always look at a wider range of solutions, which you would have not looked at if you may have succeeded in the first instance. This is why it broadens the apertoire of solutions you are looking at. This is, I would call it, especially also typical and more written about with startup founders and startup leaders, because they practice making mistakes many times.
Yeah, they call it we break things, right?
We break things. And I can speak somehow also from my own experience, because I'm an investor in 2 startups, one with a former McKinsey colleague, a very good friend in the space of digital concierge for end consumers, generative AI techniques and others, what we use, and then another one in the medical device space. And I've talked to many startup entrepreneurs, as much, by the way, compared even to CEOs of established mature companies. And the practicing of mistakes, what they do to redirect course, and also in quicker iterations, you sometimes read about that. We call it agility, agile management. What I don't care about the word, but it's being willing to make fast iterations and learning and come up with a new angle.
Yeah. Well, the point is you practice making mistakes in order to learn something to move you forward. It's not to continue to make, like you said, I mean, you have to draw the line at some point. If somebody is making repeated mistakes and not learning from it, that has to stop.
That has to stop, absolutely, because then people are not questioning those long-held beliefs and the assumptions. They're not willing to learn. So that's why and it's nice that you actually talked about it in that sequence: failure, learning from failure, practice making mistakes, and then that link to fearless learning. It's a little bit like a small loop. You need to apply fearless learning to actually practice mistakes and take the right lessons away.
Yeah, I like that, fearless learning. All right, Hans-Werner. So the journey of leadership, well, any journey for that matter, always has a starting point. So what's the starting point for this journey?
So the starting point, first of all, starting point is always getting really authentic with yourself as a leader. Doesn't matter which leader you are and at which organization you are. That is that inner starting point of understanding your own emotions and human qualities, your capabilities, and I mean also in emotional standpoint, everything we actually describe in chapter 1 to 6, and then which is lead yourself, chapter 7 to 12, lead others. That inner self-assessment is really the starting point for any leader. If you frame, or if I interpret the question more broadly, the starting point for that journey of leadership book we wrote, allow me to quickly give you the story, because it goes back to August 2021, which means we have written around 3 years to get the book done, approximately. And Ramesh and I, my friend and co-author Cody in here of the Power Forum, we actually sat together, grabbed a lunch, and we were reflecting on all those Power Forums which each of us has led and we collaborated on over all the years. And we talked to a couple of other, call it hosts, senior partner hosts for Power Forums as well. And the profound insight we had is, how can we share the lessons learned around human-centric leadership, which is that common theme around personal and professional leadership model and self-assessment, start with your inner journey? How can you share? Can it be shared? How can we share it with the broader world? And our original idea was, I would say, not aspirational enough. We thought maybe we write a small article and publish it on different outlets, which McKinsey obviously owns and manages different outlet channels. And then we reflected and said, is that really appropriate? Is it really doing justice to the cause? All the lessons learned over many years, and at that time, probably we had already conducted more than 100 programs. And we took a step back in that conversation and said, no, this is not doing justice. We need to make a more profound impact. We need to write a book. That same afternoon, we called our head of McKinsey Publishing, Raju Narisetti, and we explained him our idea, our core thesis and themes, plus our unique, truly distinctive data set and insight of experiences through the Power Forum over many years. And within a second, he said, we will publish a book. You need to write a book. We had to deal a little bit with sequencing of another book, which was supposed and got published also, CEO Excellence, which is, I mean, I call it always the one-on-one of what you have to do. But our book is really about the human leader, the human qualities, and the to be, if you wish, the to be characteristics of it, how you show up every day in your personal or your professional life. So that was the starting point of Journey of Leadership. And it was not a straight line. Also, the book was not a straight line. We went through a few iterations, what the content of the book was, how we structure it, the title, subtitle, all of the things you do when you write a book. And yeah, that's where we are 3 years and a couple of months later. And now the book is published. And we say now the important part of that journey also starts, which is the dialogue, the communication, the debating of our lessons, of our insights with folks like you, Marcel, with others who are well-known entities in the leadership space, with CEOs, with leaders of all different type of backgrounds across the world. So we are in the early part of that journey around debating and sharing our insights.
That's great. So as we wind down here, is there anything that we didn't cover that you're just, okay, this has to get out?
Yeah, I think your love and action theme I need to pick up because it is actually quite important. And we write about it in the book. First of all, it's a fundamental trait that you need to love what you do as a leader, and you need to love your people. Otherwise, in my view, you're not an authentic leader. You're certainly not a humble leader. You're not a vulnerable leader. But there's one other notion which is very nicely interlinked with love, which is empathy. Without empathy, you cannot show love in action or practice love as a leader with your organization, with your team, with your products, with your services, with your customers, with your business partners, et cetera, et cetera. So that notion of empathy is so important. And empathy obviously means, on the one hand, showing emotions, but it is more than showing emotions and compassion. It means immerse yourself in the stories of the people you are dealing with, because otherwise you are superficial to them. You are not authentic. Immersing yourself in the personal stories of the people you are dealing with on your team, when you visit a customer, or when you visit folks on the factory shop floor where you might not always show up because of natural time constraints, is so important. Only if you understand and genuinely immerse yourself in the stories of others. And yes, there are time limits. You cannot do that with thousands and thousands of people, but pick and make your choices. Only then you can be empathetic, and then listen to them, immerse yourself in the stories, then ask them how you can help. And sometimes it might only be a few well-intended words, a piece of advice. Sometimes it takes a bit more effort to help. But empathy is so fundamentally important, because at the end of the day, and that is the subline in our, I think it's chapter 12 in the book, when we say, if you want your people to care about your customers, care about your organization, care about the quality, whatever, about innovation in your products, show them first that you care. So if you want your people to care, show them that you care. I think that's a great closing line, and it nicely correlates with love in action.
You spliced that beautifully, because you're right. That does take care of one of our closing questions, which is how to lead with more actionable love. So we'll do the empathy route for sure there. I have brought so many guests that have such immense ideas and practices that leaders can do to implement that kind of behavior. Not just, I'm saying, yes, it starts with you, the leader, exhibiting empathy, immersing yourself in people's stories, right? Listening well. But then how do we actually embark on the bigger journey, which is to help other people to do the same? So now that you're creating that groundswell of empathy across the enterprise, right? Oh man, when that happens, talk about a high-performing organization, because people now can solve problems much, much faster when they just cut through the drama, when we are able to listen to people's stories and understand what's really going on, and get right to the root of the issue with empathy. It creates that much more impact for sure.
And by the way, one additional thought in terms of, frankly, a key takeaway, and that is actually a phrase which comes from Bob Chapman, and having talked a lot with him in the context of the book, and also after the publication of the book. He defines leadership to take care of the people who are entrusted to you as a leader. And that means you have to show empathy. And he practices it in many different ways in his own company, but also he is a trailblazer for that human-centric leadership approach. And the key line is always show empathy. Empathetic listening is a terminology he uses frequently. And we were inspired by that. And this is really how we created that line in chapter 12. If you want people to care, show them that you care. And that happens every day. And even a moment, Marcel, when one of us in a conversation, we might be distracted and we might be doing some multitasking, which all of us are a little bit guilty of. The other person on the phone, across the table, whatever, they notice it. So care does mean you immerse yourself in them, in their story, but also what is currently on their mind. And that is a tall order of magnitude for the leader to do it as frequently as possible.
Yep. All right, Hans-Werner, bring us home with that one thing that keeps speaking of takeaways. How would you, of all the things we talked about, what would you like us to remember the most, to walk away with here?
Yeah. So I think the key point I would like to walk away here in the conversation with you, Marcel, but frankly, any reader of the book, any person we interact with in messaging the key insights of the book, change starts with yourself. And that change with yourself is your inner assessment and reflection and self-awareness, and where you stand with your own emotions, psychological concerns, positive and negative factors in that psychological emotional setup. So your inner clock, you have to listen and look at your inner clock. And if your inner clock is going backwards and not forwards, or it does maybe jump over an hour, or here I'm using now the time analogy, then it is time to change. And that is why the subtitle is as telling as the main title. How do CEOs learn to lead from the inside out? It's inside out change. And Mahatma Gandhi framed it even much, much better. He said, if you want to see the change in the world, you need to be that change yourself.
Yeah.
So, and we Ramesh obviously has even a lot of deeper, call it additional reflections to share on that. But change starts with yourself, inside out, and reinvention is our story.
Beautifully put. And we'll end on that note. It's The Journey of Leadership. That's the book title. And if people want to connect with you, Hans-Werner, where can they go? Where can they find you?
Easiest way is on LinkedIn. I do publish on LinkedIn. I do check when people reach out to me on LinkedIn, including the messaging channel on LinkedIn. That's the way to reach out to me. Or they can go on the McKinsey website and look for our book. We have a place, a site for our book. We also follow the messages closely, which readers or other interested folks, any interested person, places on the McKinsey website.
This has been fun. We need to do it again.
Absolutely. That has been fun. And Marcel, let's plan whatever, the episode 2 at some point, not too distant in the future, because the good news is we learn in every dialogue, whether with you now. I met, 6 CEOs, executives earlier this week here in Detroit. I met aviation executives and CEOs in Dallas 2 weeks ago. There's always a new level of insight, a different context these leaders are operating in. So when we have those dialogues, when I engage with those folks, I always already get a few more ideas for the next book. So not that we want to write the next book now. We have some aspirations. First, we need to get the message out here. But the feedback and the dialogue is so important.
Yeah, this is an important book, and I'm so glad you joined us today. Folks, you can keep the conversation going on social media with hashtag Love in Action Podcast, and look for my show notes as well as a YouTube link to watch the show and see me and Hans-Werner interact with you. You can find all that on my website, marcelschwantes.com. For Hans-Werner Kaas, I'm Marcel Schwantes. Remember, love wins. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Love in Action podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it, subscribe, and leave us a review. Until next time, don't forget, the future of leadership is love in action. Believe it practice it, and watch your leadership and business flourish.